The Carter mansion rose out of the hillside like a monument to wealth, its marble walls and towering glass windows catching the first light of dawn. Yet inside, the silence was so absolute it felt more like a museum than a home. Jonathan Carter walked through the wide corridors with his usual measured pace, shoes clicking softly against imported stone, each step echoing as if reminding him of his own solitude. At 38, he was one of the most powerful men in the city. Technology, real estate, finance, every sector bent beneath the weight of Carter Enterprises. And yet, no matter how many contracts he signed or towers bore his name, the one empire he could not command was trust. 5 years earlier, Marcus Dunning, his closest friend and business partner, had stolen millions and vanished. Jonathan could still remember the day like a wound that never healed, the gut-twisting betrayal, the humiliation of realizing he had been blind to the lies. That single act had hardened something in him forever. From that moment on, Jonathan lived by a simple creed: trust no one, expect betrayal, and you will never be surprised. He fortified his world with cameras in every hall, coded locks on every door, and rules so strict that even his staff felt like prisoners rather than employees. Housekeepers came and went in rapid succession, 14 in 6 months. Each dismissed for mistakes he claimed were unforgivable, though in truth, none of them could pass the invisible test he carried in his heart. Every smile looked rehearsed, every gesture a potential mask. He convinced himself this was wisdom, not cruelty. That morning, Margaret, his secretary, reminded him that a new candidate was on her way. Jonathan adjusted his tie in the mirror and told himself it didn't matter who she was. She would last a week at most. Then he would discover the flaw, expose it, and confirm once more that he was right to guard himself. When the bell rang at exactly 2 o'clock, Jonathan opened the heavy oak door with the same practiced detachment he used in boardrooms. But the sight before him forced him, for just a moment, to hesitate. A woman stood there with a worn leather purse slung over one shoulder, her light brown hair tied into a loose bun with a few strands escaping like stubborn rebels. Her uniform was plain, her shoes scuffed, yet her smile lit her face as though she carried sunlight inside her. "Mr. Carter, I'm Lily Jefferson," she said, extending her hand. "Sorry if I'm a minute late. My car's GPS and I had a small argument." Jonathan shook her hand. It was warm, steady, not the trembling grip of someone intimidated by wealth. He ushered her inside, watching how her eyes wandered across the vast staircase and polished chandeliers. Most applicants gasped at the opulence, fumbled to flatter him. Lily tilted her head and whispered almost to herself, "This house is beautiful, but it feels a little sad." The words struck him like a stone against glass. Sad. No one had ever dared to call his mansion that. He masked his reaction behind a stiff nod and led her to his office, where the interview unfolded. Her resume was unremarkable: waitress, laundromat, caregiver for her grandmother. Yet when she spoke, her answers carried an honesty that unsettled him. She wasn't ashamed of where she had come from. She wasn't desperate to impress. Still, Jonathan told himself, everyone wears a mask at first, so he prepared what he always prepared: a test. That night he stacked crisp bills, $500 in 50s, on his desk, arranging them to look carelessly abandoned. He adjusted the angle of the hidden camera to capture every detail. Tomorrow, while pretending to doze in his chair, he would see who Lily Jefferson truly was. In the shadows of the vast office, Jonathan Carter rehearsed his own deception. He told himself it was necessary, that it was only wisdom, not cruelty. Yet somewhere deep in the silence, beneath the marble floors and expensive art, a question he refused to face lingered. What if, one day, someone did not take the bait? What if his fortress wasn't just protecting him, but keeping him from living? And so the stage was set. The heartless millionaire ready with his trap, the single mother walking unknowingly into the test, and a house with no laughter about to meet the woman who might change everything. The morning sunlight crept slowly into Jonathan Carter's office, brushing against the polished mahogany desk where the bills lay scattered. Every corner of the mansion seemed as silent as a tomb, but inside Jonathan's chest, his heart carried an unusual restlessness. Today was the day of the test. He had spent half the night perfecting the plan, positioning the camera to capture every movement, rehearsing the steady rhythm of a man drifting into false sleep. It was cruel, he knew that, but cruelty had become his armor. Better to be a man who set traps than one who fell into them. At 7 sharp, the doorbell chimed. Through the screen of his security monitor, Jonathan saw Lily Jefferson standing at the entrance. She wore a simple uniform, neat and pressed, and carried a small thermal bag. When he opened the door, the faint aroma of blueberries slipped into the hallway. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, her smile as warm as it had been the day before. "I hope you don't mind. I brought muffins. Emma helped me bake them, so they might have a few fingerprints, but I promise they're magical." Jonathan was caught off guard. None of the previous housekeepers had ever brought him anything except excuses. For a moment, he wanted to reject the gesture, to push it aside with his usual sharpness, but the smell of the muffins reminded him of mornings long ago when his mother used to hum in the kitchen. He quickly masked the thought and guided her into the house. The first hour was spent with introductions to each room. Lily walked through the mansion not like a servant measuring walls she would dust, but like a guest searching for its story. She touched the banister of the staircase with admiration, whispered how the living room seemed perfect for reading on a rainy day, and paused in the kitchen as if listening for a heartbeat. "This house is beautiful," she said softly, "but it feels like it's waiting for someone to love it." Jonathan gave no reply. Words like love were foreign to the language he used in these halls. Yet even as he dismissed her comment, something inside him stirred uncomfortably. Finally, he led her to the office. On the desk, the bills waited in their quiet trap. He gave her a list of chores, instructed her to start in the living room, and then reclined in his chair as if preparing for a short nap. His breathing slowed, his eyelids drooped. To anyone watching, he looked like a man lost in heavy sleep. Minutes passed. He heard the distant whir of the vacuum, the careful shifting of furniture, the muted rhythm of a humming voice floating down the hallway. Then came the sound of footsteps. The office door creaked open. Jonathan's chest tightened, though his face remained slack, his eyelids closed. Lily's steps crossed the rug. He felt her presence at the desk. For a heartbeat, he imagined the bills vanishing, the soft crackle of paper folded into a pocket, the cold confirmation of his belief that no one could be trusted. He braced himself for it. But what came instead was silence, not the silence of guilt, but of intention. He heard the faint sound of paper shifting, not in haste but in careful rhythm. She was touching the money. His pulse quickened, yet the sound was different. Soft, deliberate, almost like the folding of a letter. Her voice, gentle and low, slipped into the stillness. "Money left out like this attracts bad energy, Mr. Carter," she whispered as though speaking to a friend. "It deserves a little respect." Jonathan wanted to open his eyes, to see what she was doing, but he forced himself to remain still. Minutes later, her footsteps retreated, the door closing as quietly as it had opened. When at last he opened his eyes, the sight before him made his breath hitch. The bills had not been taken. They had been arranged into the shape of a heart, each corner precise, every line aligned. And in the center rested a small yellow note, her handwriting looping with delicate care. "Organized money attracts prosperity." Boss L. Jonathan stared at it, his chest rising with something he hadn't felt in years. A laugh escaped him, loud, unpolished, unstoppable. It echoed against the office walls, shocking even himself. For the first time since Marcus's betrayal, he felt his frozen heart tremble with life. And downstairs, Lily hummed as she dusted the living room, unaware that in one quiet act she had cracked open a door in Jonathan's soul that had been locked for far too long. The mansion no longer felt entirely silent when morning came. For years, Jonathan had woken to the tick of a clock and the hollow echo of his own footsteps. But now there was a soft hum floating through the air. Lily's voice. She was in the kitchen, her tone light and almost playful, as though she were speaking to someone invisible. Jonathan lingered at the top of the staircase, unsure why he was listening, yet unable to stop. When he finally stepped into the kitchen, he found a note taped to the silver surface of his espresso machine. In looping handwriting, it read, Good morning, Mr. Fancy Coffee May. Today treat you kindly. L. Jonathan stared at the note longer than he should have. Something inside his chest tugged at him. It was ridiculous, he thought, yet he folded the note carefully and slid it into his pocket. By the third day, he found something even stranger. The robot vacuum, usually a lifeless machine that whirred across marble floors, had googly eyes glued onto it and a paper sign draped across its side. The sign read, "Sir Cleanington Knight of Royal Cleaning." Jonathan arched an eyebrow as Lily passed by with a basket of laundry. "It's a machine," he told her dryly. "It doesn't need a name." "Of course it does," she replied, patting the vacuum affectionately as it rolled by. "Everything works better when it feels seen, even machines." Jonathan wanted to argue, but instead he found himself watching the vacuum circle the hall with its silly new personality. He shook his head, yet something about it warmed him in ways he couldn't explain. On the refrigerator appeared drawings, crayon sketches of houses, flowers, and stick figures with wild smiles. Emma's name was signed in clumsy handwriting at the bottom. Jonathan frowned when he first saw them, ready to demand the stainless steel remain untouched. But then his eyes settled on one particular drawing, a man in a suit, dark hair scribbled with care, and beneath it the words, "Thank you, Mr. Carter, for giving Mommy a job." His breath caught. The paper felt like it weighed more than gold when he touched it. He told Lily she could leave the drawing on the fridge, his voice quieter than usual. Each day, something new appeared. A jar of cookies on the counter, music drifting through the halls, Lily cleaning while twirling with the broom as if it were a dance partner. Jonathan caught her once, frozen in the doorway as she laughed and spun, her cheeks pink from embarrassment when she noticed him. "I can use headphones if you'd prefer," she said quickly. "No," he answered before thinking. "Leave it. The house feels more alive this way." Still, beneath the warmth growing in his halls, a quiet thread of tension stretched tighter. Jonathan caught himself waiting for the mask to slip, for Lily to reveal her true intentions. He could not believe anyone so genuine could exist in a world he had long known as cold and ruthless. Suspicion was his shadow, whispering that no kindness came without a price. Late one evening, Jonathan stood at his office window, looking down into the garden where Lily was setting out a picnic blanket for Emma the next day. Unseen by them, in the trees across the street, a camera lens glinted under the faint moonlight. Someone was watching. Someone who wanted Jonathan's newfound sliver of joy to turn into something dangerous. The storm began on a morning that Jonathan had expected to be like any other. He sat in his office, locked in a video conference with investors from Japan, his face set in its usual mask of authority. Numbers flashed across the screen, promises of profit, the familiar rhythm of his world. Then the doorbell rang once, twice, 3 times, sharp and insistent. He frowned. Margaret never allowed interruptions during meetings. Irritated, he muted his microphone and pressed the intercom. Before Margaret could answer, it was Lily's voice that carried through the hall. Her tone was urgent, trembling in a way he had never heard before. "Mr. Carter, I need to speak with you. It's important." Jonathan excused himself from the call and stepped out. In the entryway, Lily stood with her daughter Emma, the little girl's cheeks streaked with tears, her small backpack clutched to her chest as if it were a shield. "What happened?" Jonathan demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. Lily bent down, brushing a tear from Emma's face before looking up at him. "Miss Rose had to rush to the hospital. Her sister was in an accident. I had no choice but to bring Emma here. I know I breaks the rules, but please, I can't miss work and I have nowhere else to take her. She won't be any trouble, I promise." Jonathan's gaze dropped to the girl. Emma looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes, trying to be brave, though her lip trembled. For a man who had built his life on rules, this was the ultimate test. His world demanded silence, order, control. A child was the opposite of all three. "Please, Mr. Carter," Emma whispered softly, her voice fragile but steady. "I'll be good. Mommy said you're kind, even when you pretend to be serious." Jonathan's chest tightened. He surprised himself when he answered, "Of course she can stay." Relief flooded Lily's face so strongly that for a moment, Jonathan thought she might collapse. She mouthed a silent thank you and hurried to begin her chores. Emma stayed behind, shifting nervously from foot to foot, her small hands twisting the straps of her backpack. Jonathan crouched down to meet her at eye level. "Are you hungry?" "A little. Mommy made me a sandwich, but I couldn't eat it at school. I was worried about Miss Rose." He hesitated, then offered his hand. "Come on, let's see what we can find in the kitchen." In minutes, the unthinkable happened. The billionaire who ruled empires found himself slicing apples and pouring juice for a 6-year-old, who swung her legs on the high kitchen stool as though she belonged there. She chattered about her teacher, about her stuffed animals, about how Miss Rose baked cookies that felt like hugs. Jonathan listened, really listened, until her words wrapped themselves around the silence in his house and pulled it apart. "Mr. Carter, can I ask you something?" she said between bites. "Go ahead." "Why is your house so quiet?" Jonathan froze, the knife still in his hand. "I work a lot. I need silence to concentrate. But what about when you're not working? Don't you get lonely?" "Sometimes being alone is good," he said carefully. Emma tilted her head, considering. "Mommy says a little bit of lonely is fine, but too much makes your heart sad." "Is your heart sad, Mr. Carter?" The brutal innocence of the question struck deeper than any betrayal ever had. He looked at the child and for once could not lie. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Then you need more hugs. Hugs heal sad hearts. Mommy taught me that." Before he could react, Emma slipped off the stool and walked toward the living room. Jonathan followed her with quiet curiosity. That was when it happened. She leaned too close to a side table where a crystal vase gleamed under the sunlight. One careless elbow, and the vase tipped, crashing onto the marble floor with a shattering sound that echoed through the house. Emma froze, eyes wide with terror. "I broke it. I broke your pretty thing." Tears welled up quickly. "You're going to fire Mommy. We won't have money for food. I'm so sorry." Jonathan's heart broke at the sight of her despair. He knelt down carefully, ignoring the shards. "Emma, look at me," he said gently. She lifted her tearful eyes, expecting rage. Instead, she found kindness. "You're not in trouble. It was an accident. Things can be replaced. People can't." The words stunned him as much as her. He had never believed them until that moment. Emma sniffled, then slowly crouched to gather some of the larger shards. She placed them in a small bowl and arranged them into a mosaic that caught the light in broken rainbows. "See," she said with shy pride. "Now it's the vase that got back up again. It's not the same, but it's still beautiful." Jonathan stared at her creation, imperfect, but filled with innocence and hope. Something inside him shifted, something that had been frozen for years. Neither of them noticed the faint click of a camera shutter from outside the gates, hidden among the trees. Someone was watching, and what they saw that afternoon would soon ignite a storm far beyond the walls of the Carter mansion. Jonathan Carter began the day as he always did, with his coffee bee, black and his tie perfectly aligned. But when Margaret, his secretary, called from the other wing, her voice trembled in a way he had never heard before. "Sir, you need to turn on the news right now." Annoyed, Jonathan picked up the remote, expecting market updates or political noise, but when the television flickered to life, the screen froze him in place. His garden appeared in sharp color, the checkered picnic blankets spread across the grass, and there he was caught mid-laughter, with Emma spinning in his arms while Lily watched with that radiant smile. The headline screamed across the bottom of the screen: "Billionaire Jonathan Carter in secret romance with housekeeper. Photos raise questions about child with unknown father." Jonathan's jaw tightened. Dozens of images flashed one after another, intimate moments stolen through a telephoto lens. Emma leaning against his chest while flying a kite, Lily laughing as Jonathan carried her daughter on his shoulders, Jonathan kneeling in the grass with a smile that none of his investors had ever seen. The phone lit up with calls, board members demanding explanations, family members speaking of ruined reputations, reporters begging for comment. His sister Caroline's number appeared, and he answered only to hear her voice laced with disdain. "What are you doing, Jonathan? You are destroying everything over a maid and her illegitimate child." The Carters are becoming a joke. Before he could respond, the line went dead. Messages flooded in from executives and friends, all echoing the same thing. End it before it destroys you. The worst call came from Lily. Her voice was broken through the static of tears. I saw the news. I never wanted this. Emma and I will leave today. I'll hand in my resignation. No. Jonathan's voice snapped with more force than he meant, but the words burned with truth. You are not running. I will fix this. How? She wept, spared. They are calling me a gold digger. They are calling Emma a mistake. How can you fight lies that spread faster than truth? Trust me, Lily, Jonathan said quietly. For once, just trust me. That afternoon, he did something his staff had never seen. Without a script, without lawyers, he called a press conference. Cameras filled the Carter Enterprises boardroom, flashes popping like sparks in a storm. Jonathan walked to the podium with the posture of a man prepared for battle, his face stern but his eyes burning with something far deeper. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, he began. You published photographs of me with Lily Jefferson and her daughter Emma. Allow me to tell you the truth. The room fell silent. Lily is not just my housekeeper. She is the most honest and hardworking person I have ever known. In a world where masks are common, she is real. And Emma is not a scandal. She is an extraordinary child who taught me that a home is built on laughter, not marble. A reporter shouted, Are you admitting to a relationship with her? Jonathan paused, the weight of his choice pressing against him. For years he had lived for control, protecting reputation like a fortress. But then he saw in his mind Emma's tear-stained face, arranging broken glass into Beauty Lily's smile that filled the hollow corners of his mansion. Yes, he said firmly. I am admitting that Lily and Emma Jefferson changed my life. I choose them, and I will not allow anyone to tarnish their names. Chaos erupted, cameras flashing, shouts rising, but Jonathan stepped down from the podium, ignoring them all. He had just burned the bridge to his old life, yet for the first time he felt free. Far across the city, in a shadowed office, Marcus Dunning, the friend who had betrayed him years ago, leaned back in his chair watching the broadcast. A slow smile curled across his lips. So Jonathan finally found a weakness. And while the world erupted in scandal, Jonathan Carter did not yet know that a far more dangerous storm had just been set into motion. The invitation arrived in a thick envelope sealed with gold letters on cream paper. Margaret placed it on Jonathan's desk with hesitation. It's from the Children's Hope Foundation. They want you to attend the annual charity ball as the keynote speaker. They also requested that you bring your family. Jonathan studied the envelope with a mixture of dread and curiosity. He rarely attended these gatherings, preferring to sign checks and remain unseen. But after the press conference, he knew every eye would be waiting for him. Every whisper would test his resolve. When Lily entered carrying a tray of coffee, Jonathan looked at her with sudden clarity. How would you feel about going to the event with me? The tray nearly slipped from her hands. Me? Are you serious? They want to see the woman who changed my life. They should see you as I do. Lily shook her head quickly. Jonathan, I don't belong in that world. I don't own gowns. I don't know how to waltz. I barely know which fork to use. You talk to me every day, he said gently, and I'm supposedly an important person. You belong more than anyone there. Hours later, they were standing inside a boutique downtown. Madame Dubois, the sharp-eyed French shopkeeper, circled Lily with the precision of a general. Non flashy elegance. Let her shine herself, she declared. Dress after dress appeared, but when Lily stepped out in a navy gown that hugged her curves just enough and brought a glow to her eyes, Jonathan forgot how to breathe. Perfect, he whispered before saying it louder. Absolutely perfect. On the night of the ball, the mansion hummed with nerves. Emma kissed her mother's cheek and whispered, You look like a princess, Mommy, before being tucked safely with the babysitter. Jonathan waited at the base of the staircase in his black suit, polished shoes gleaming. When Lily appeared, his heart slammed against his ribs. She descended slowly, her hair in a graceful bun pair, pearls glinting at her ears and that uncertain smile on her lips. "You are stunning," Jonathan said, offering his arm. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers and polished marble floors. The moment they entered, 100 heads turned. Whispers surged like a tide. Some faces softened with admiration, but others curled in disdain. Lily gripped his arm tightly. "Everyone is staring." "Because you are the most beautiful woman here," Jonathan murmured, and meant every word. At first her nerves threatened to undo her, but then her old instincts returned. Years of waitressing had taught her how to talk to anyone. When a senator's wife commented on her jewelry, Lily laughed. "Thank you, but I warned Jonathan if he ever bought anything too expensive, Emma and I would use it for dress-up." The woman burst into genuine laughter. When a banker sneered about people from humble backgrounds, Lily answered without flinching. "Yes, I come from humble beginnings, but I learned humility is a luxury many wealthy people cannot afford." The sneer vanished, replaced by uneasy silence. Jonathan watched in awe as she moved through the glittering crowd, not pretending to be someone else, but simply herself, and winning hearts along the way. Then came his turn. The host called him to the podium. Jonathan reached into his pocket for the speech prepared by his staff. But when his eyes found Lily's tear-bright smile at the front table, the paper suddenly meant nothing. "I came tonight prepared to speak about philanthropy and social responsibility." He began, his voice steady. "But when I look at you all, I think about something far simpler. Family." The room leaned in. "A year ago, I believed family was about bloodlines and preserving legacy. But I was wrong. Family is about the people who make you want to be better. The people who remind you that true wealth is not in accounts or skyscrapers, but in the laughter of a child who believes hugs can heal a sad heart. It is in the smile of a woman who turned my house into a home." The silence was total until the applause crashed like thunder. Yet even as Jonathan's words stirred the crowd, a pair of cold eyes watched from the corner of the room. Marcus Dunning stood in the shadows, drink in hand, his smirk sharp as a blade. "Bravo, old friend," he whispered under the music. "Now let's see how long your fairy tale survives when I decide to pull the strings." And while Jonathan held Lily's hand under the golden lights, certain his world was finally healing, the trap Marcus prepared was already closing around them. The golden lights of the ballroom still lingered in Jonathan's memory when the first crack appeared. Days after the charity ball, when praise and interviews filled his inbox, a single unmarked envelope was slid under his office door. Jonathan picked it up with unease. Inside was a stack of photographs, not the joyful ones from the press, but darker, carefully chosen images. Lily entering his mansion at night as if sneaking, Emma clutching his hand in the garden, a caption scribbled in red ink beneath it. "Weakness." At the bottom of the pile was a single sentence typed in bold letters. "She is not who you think she is." Jonathan's blood ran cold. His first instinct was suspicion. Old wounds opened and whispered that maybe kindness was only another mask. But then he remembered Lily's laughter, Emma's mosaic made from broken glass, the way his house finally felt alive. He shoved the photos into his desk drawer, unwilling to let fear rule him again. But Marcus Dunning was not finished. He had returned from the shadows, and he wanted more than money. He wanted revenge. Marcus began whispering into the ears of board members, planting rumors that Jonathan's newfound family was a liability. Contracts were suddenly delayed. Investors hesitated. Rivals circled like vultures. Jonathan tried to shield Lily from the growing storm, but even she noticed the tension in his shoulders and the long hours in his office. One evening, she found him sitting alone in the study, staring at the photographs again. "What are those?" she asked quietly. Jonathan hesitated, then showed her. For a moment, fear flickered across her face, but then she straightened. "This is Marcus, isn't it? He won't stop until he takes everything from you." Jonathan looked at her with sharp eyes. "How do you know his name?" Silence filled the room like a blade suspended in the air. Lily lowered her gaze. "Because I've seen him before. Years ago when I was working at the laundromat. He came in often meeting couriers in the alley. I didn't understand then, but I recognized the voice when your lawyer played that old recording. I never said anything because I thought it wasn't my place. But Jonathan, you need to know Marcus has been moving in the dark long before this." The revelation sent a chill through him. Lily's memory connected pieces his investigators had missed. Receipts, courier slips, dates. Suddenly, Marcus's hidden hand became clearer. Jonathan felt the old instinct to pull back to lock the doors around his heart. But then Lily took his hand. "Don't shut me out. You once said trust no one. But maybe this is the moment you prove yourself wrong." Her words cut deeper than Marcus's threats. Jonathan's walls trembled. Could he truly let someone stand beside him in battle? That night, Jonathan called his lawyer, David Richardson, and laid out every clue Lily had noticed. They spread receipts, maps, dates across the desk like a battlefield. Together, they began to trace Marcus's moves, preparing for the confrontation that was coming. Outside the mansion, the city lights glowed, but hidden among them was Marcus himself watching from a black car. He raised a glass of whiskey and muttered, "Yo, you think love makes you stronger, Jonathan, but I will show you it makes you weak." And in that moment, the war truly began. The night had settled heavy over the Carter mansion when Jonathan spread the papers across his desk like pieces of a broken mirror. Receipts from a laundromat years ago, courier slips Lily had kept without knowing their weight, and fragments of old recordings from company archives. David Richardson leaned over the desk, studying them with a sharp eye while Lily stood close, her hand resting on Emma's drawing taped to the corner of the lamp, as if drawing courage from her daughter's crayon smile. "This is a network," David said finally. "Marcus has been building it for years. Shell companies, offshore accounts, payments routed through couriers. He was preparing for a return long before your press conference." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "And he's using Lily and Emma as the weak point. He thinks if he poisons the board against me, if he makes them believe my family is a liability, he can reclaim what he lost." Lily's voice was steady, though her eyes betrayed the storm within. "He won't stop unless we stop him first. I've seen those couriers. They came to the laundromat every Thursday evening. I still remember their faces. If I can identify them, it will prove Marcus has been moving money long before he pretended to vanish." Jonathan turned to her, torn between awe and fear. Awe that she had noticed details even his security team had missed. Fear that the deeper she stepped into his world, the greater the danger became. That night they drove quietly to a storage unit on the far edge of the city. Lily led the way with a small flashlight, her memory guiding her to a dusty box of slips she had once tucked away without reason other than instinct. Receipts marked with Marcus's name, courier logs that matched the dates of stolen transfers. Jonathan sifted through. "Jeech, them," his pulse quickening as the puzzle began to form a clear picture. "You've given us the trail," David whispered. "With this we can tie Marcus directly to the theft, but you need to be ready. He'll know the walls are closing in." When they returned to the mansion, Emma was asleep in the guest room, her stuffed unicorn tucked under her chin. Jonathan paused at her door, watching her chest rise and fall. For years, his world had been numbers and contracts. Now the thought of losing this small piece of peace tore at him more than the fear of losing an empire. Downstairs, Lily brewed tea, her hands trembling slightly. "He'll come after us," she said softly. Jonathan placed a hand over hers. "Then let him. We fight together this time." Neither of them knew that across town Marcus was already moving. In a penthouse filled with shadows, he placed a call to a board member. "Tomorrow we vote," he said with calm menace. "Carter will fall and his maid will take the blame. By this time next week, Carter Enterprises will be mine again." But as Marcus set his trap, Jonathan was finally prepared, not with suspicion or loneliness, but with allies who believed in him. The storm was gathering, and the next day would decide not only the fate of his empire, but the survival of the family he had just begun to build. The boardroom of Carter Enterprises had never felt so heavy. Rows of dark leather chairs encircled the long table, and on the walls hung portraits of past leaders who seemed to watch with judgmental eyes. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable, but inside his pulse beat like a drum. Lily sat near the back, her presence quiet but unshakable. David Richardson shuffled the files that contained the evidence they had pieced together from Lily's memories and the forgotten receipts. The doors opened with a hiss, and Marcus Dunning strolled in with the arrogance of a man who believed victory was already his. His Lee was sharp, his tailored suit gleamed, and in his hand he carried a folder thick with accusations. He sat without asking for permission and spread the papers across the polished table. "Gentlemen and ladies of the board," Marcus began smoothly, "I regret to inform you that your esteemed CEO has compromised this company. He has entangled himself with a maid and her child, creating scandal after scandal. Investors are whispering. Deals are crumbling. Do you want to risk billions for the sake of his midlife indulgence?" Murmurs rippled through the room. Jonathan's hands tightened on the edge of the table, but before he could speak, Marcus continued. "I have documents that prove mismanagement, funds misplaced, decisions made recklessly since he allowed this distraction into his life." He slid the papers forward. They looked convincing at first glance, contracts altered to implicate Jonathan. It was the same trick Marcus had used years ago, only refined, deadlier. Jonathan looked around the room at the faces of people he had worked with for years, many of them uncertain, wavering. For a moment, the old fear clawed at him, the fear of betrayal, the fear that trust was a weakness. Then he caught Lily's eyes. She gave the smallest nod, and in that moment he remembered her words. "Trust me." Jonathan stood, his voice steady. "You speak of distraction, Marcus, but what you bring is corruption." He gestured to David, who placed Lily's box of saved slips onto the table. "These are receipts dating back years, linking you to shell companies and couriers that carried stolen funds. Proof that while I was building this company, you were plotting its downfall." Marcus laughed, but the sound cracked when Lily rose and stepped forward. "I worked at the laundromat where those couriers met. I remember their faces, I remember the nights they came, and I recognized Marcus's voice on a recording years later. He thought no one noticed, but I did." She placed her hand on the files, her voice calm but unyielding. "These papers are lies, but this evidence is truth." The board leaned forward as David played the voicemail where Marcus's voice arranged hidden transfers. The forensic analyst's report confirmed the match. The silence that followed was deafening. One by one, the board members turned to Jonathan, their doubt melting into shame. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Dunning, these documents condemn you not, Mr. Carter. Security will escort you out." Marcus's face twisted, fury burning in his eyes as two guards approached. "You think this is over, Jonathan? You think love makes you strong? It will destroy you." His voice echoed as he was dragged from the room. Jonathan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. He turned to Lily and in front of everyone reached for her hand. "This woman did what an army of investigators could not. She saved this company and she saved me. She is not my weakness. She is my strength." The boardroom erupted in applause, not out of obligation but respect, and in that moment, Jonathan realized the empire he had built was no longer made of glass and steel alone. It was built on trust, and on the small family who had taught him how to fight not with suspicion, but with love. Later on the steps outside the building, as the city lights flickered and reporters swarmed, Jonathan pulled Lily close. His voice was quiet, meant only for her. "I don't want you as my housekeeper. I want you as my future. Will you build a life with me?" Tears glimmered in her eyes as she whispered yes, and as Jonathan slipped his arm around her shoulders, he knew Marcus's threats still lingered, but for the first time he was ready to face them, not alone, but with the family he had chosen. The days after Marcus's arrest felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time in years, Jonathan walked through his mansion without the weight of suspicion pressing down on him. Laughter echoed through the halls where silence once reigned, Emma's giggles mixing with Lily's soft humming. Yet even as peace returned, there remained a sense that something unfinished waited just beyond sight, a truth that had yet to surface. One evening, Jonathan sat in his study, flipping through old files, when Lily entered carrying a small wooden box. Her hands trembled slightly as she set it on the desk. "I've been holding on to this for years," she said. "I never understood why until now." Jonathan lifted the lid, and inside lay a delicate music box, its paint chipped from age. When he wound it, a familiar tune floated out notes that wrapped around him like a ghost from another lifetime. His breath caught. This song, it was my mother's favorite. She used to play it every night before bed. Lily's eyes filled with tears. I know, because I met her once, years ago at the clinic where I took my grandmother. Your mother was there waiting for an appointment, and she dropped this music box. I picked it up for her. We talked only for a few minutes, but she looked at me with such kindness. She said if I ever met her stubborn son, I should remind him that life is about building a home where laughter is louder than alarms. She made me promise. I didn't even know who she was until the day I came here for the interview and saw her portrait in the hall. Jonathan's heart thundered as he traced the worn edges of the music box. His mother's words returned with vivid clarity, and for the first time he understood the invisible thread that had pulled Lily into his life. It wasn't chance. It was a promise carried across years, waiting to be fulfilled. He rose from his chair and pulled her close, his voice breaking. You weren't just meant to walk into this house. You were meant to remind me of who I was before I lost myself. You and Emma. You are the home she wanted me to build. Tears slid down Lily's cheeks as she whispered, I kept that promise, Jonathan. I gave you her message when you were ready to hear it. Later that night, Jonathan tucked Emma into bed. She clutched her stuffed unicorn and smiled sleepily. Daddy Jonathan, can you tell me again what the first rule of our family is? Jonathan kissed her forehead and answered softly, that love always wins. As he stepped into the hallway, Lily slipped her hand into his. The mansion that once felt like a prison now pulsed with warmth. Photographs of their laughter hung on the walls. The mosaic Emma had made from broken glass gleamed proudly on the mantel. And now the music box sat on the shelf, filling the house with the melody of a mother's love and a promise kept. Outside, spring wind stirred the garden flowers, bending like they were bowing to a new beginning. Jonathan Carter looked at the two souls who had turned his empire of stone into a kingdom of hearts, and knew with unshakable certainty that his story of distrust was over. His true legacy would not be towers or contracts, but the family he had chosen. And as the music box played on the final note, lingered a reminder that sometimes destiny arrives not in grand moments, but in the quiet promises carried by strangers who were always meant to become home.